Welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for starting the beginning of your day with us here, the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. Folks, I want to introduce you to a guy by the name of Benjamin Powell. Benjamin is an author. The book is titled Socialism Sucks. Two Economists Drink Their Way Through the Unfree World. It's co-authored by, again, Mr. Powell here and his friend Robert Lawson. Benjamin, welcome to the program.
Hey, thank you, Paul. Happy to be with you.
Absolutely. So tell us, what inspired you to write this book, sir?
Well, my buddy Bob called me and wanted to get drunk in Cuba, and I needed a decent excuse for a work project. My wife doesn't like me taking vacations with him.
That's
that's kind of the funny answer, but the real answer is the rise and popularity of socialism in the United States, again, particularly with young people, and a lot of confusion about what socialism actually is and is not. What's the relationship between democracy and socialism, or lack of relationship? And what countries in the world really are socialist and aren't, and what's the historic track record of performance of the ones who are?
So, yeah, the left says, when we say on the right, okay, name me one successful socialist country, they're like, Norway. It's like, well, no, you can keep your money there. So do you guys make that distinction in the book?
First chapter in the book, the introduction, is called Not Socialism, Sweden. And it applies equally to Norway and Denmark or whatever other Nordic country you want to point out on this. Listen, the Nordic countries have big welfare states. They tax a lot, and they do a lot of transfers, and they regulate labor markets a bit too. But other than that, they're very pro-market. They have minimal business regulation. They have great security of private property rights. They enforce private contracts. They have sound money. They lightly regulate banks. They have free trade. These places are capitalist countries. Socialism means government ownership or control over the factors of production, instead of private property with entrepreneurs making business decisions based on profit and losses. These places are highly capitalist. My co-author, Bob, he also co-authors the Economic Freedom of the World annual report that tries to rank basically how capitalist versus socialist countries are. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, these are all in the top fifth of the index of most free market economies. I think Denmark's even 16th or something like that, barely behind the United States. Now, I think big welfare states have consequences that are bad. Sweden, since adopting a big welfare state, slowed its growth. It didn't become a socialist hellhole, but it did stop growing and is no longer among the very richest nations in the world. Instead, it's in the bottom half of the OECD countries. So there's trade-offs there, but let's not confuse it with socialism.
I completely agree. Yeah, the so-called Swedish model, it might be attractive, big welfare state, but it is not socialism, textbook. So what about like Venezuela? That would be what we're seeing. That's textbook socialism, isn't it?
It is now. So this was, you said when you ask democratic socialists what country do they want to be like, and they say a Nordic country. If you go back 10 years ago, this was the poster child for democratic socialism. Venezuela, that is. Venezuela was relatively wealthy. Cesar Chavez came to power in what was widely viewed as a free and fair election in 1998. He was reelected, had a new constitution democratically put in. They said this is functioning democratic socialism. Two big problems here, of course. The supposed success it was having. Venezuela sits on the world's largest oil reserves. And during the period of high oil prices running up to 2013, it was the foreign exchange that they earned from selling oil abroad that they used to subsidize everything all over their economy. But meanwhile, underneath what was happening was they were socializing the means of production, whether not just government ownership, but government de facto control with edicts of what people could do with their private property. And the system was collapsing. Food imports were increasing dramatically in Venezuela because the food production system was collapsing. As soon as oil prices went down, and in fact, by the way, oil production has gone down because the socialist nationalized oil company isn't good at maintaining its facilities, they lost the ability to get so much foreign exchange, and now the country is starving. It's also an example of how you cannot maintain democratic freedoms with a socialist economic system. A socialist economic system entails planning and coordination by the government. It entails centralizing power. Once you do that, you cannot have people oppose your plans. And when they try to do so politically, invariably the people with the political power crack down on them. So the Venezuelan elections this last time around for Maduro were a complete sham. government employees at government nationalized companies were told that they must go vote for the current regime. People were handed out food aid by the government next to the polling places. When Maduro overwhelmingly gets reelected, and the average Venezuelan lost 24 pounds last year, you know the election is a fraud. They didn't all of a sudden find Jenny Craig. They're starving under his system.
Gosh, yeah, it's absolutely terrible. And I agree with the president in the State of the Union when he said, we will never be a socialist country. It's trying to protect the people from what, Venezuela and what other people have gone through. I mean, talk about Cuba. I mean, this is an example. By the way, folks, we're talking with Benjamin Powell. He's a co-author of a book, Socialism Sucks. Two economists drink their way through the unfree world. I want to get to the drinking part here in a minute, Benjamin. But tell us a little bit about Cuba.
Sure, and before I do, I just want to say final word on Venezuela, too. This is a point related to what you're saying about not happening here. I mean, Venezuela in 1970 was a highly capitalist country. It was among the top 10 freest economically in the world, and they were very wealthy. They were wealthier than Spain itself. So the poverty that we observed in Venezuela, people crossing the border to Colombia trying to buy basic necessities, these were people who were previously middle class, upper middle class. It wasn't the type of normal third world poverty that you see traveling to poorer countries. So it really is a warning to other wealthy places of what you can do to yourself with these policies.
Yeah, destroy your civilization. So Cuba then.
So Cuba is, of course, a much longer experiment with socialism than Venezuela. In the book, we call Cuba subsistence socialism because it's just kind of chugging along. And, in fact, if you want to observe a socialist economic system, Cuba is the best place in the world to do it today. It's safe. You can travel throughout the country. And the kind of key as you're looking through and traveling Cuba is what's messed up because they're poor and what's messed up because it's planned. And some of it isn't obvious right away. But you're walking through downtown central Havana and trying to figure out, because we like to drink our way from one bar to the next and kind of stumble around and figure things out. And it's hard to figure out which street to walk down because there's no signs. Why are there no signs? Well, it's because no one gives a damn. If you're state-owned businesses, you don't really care whether you sell product or not. Not the matter of being poor. You can go to some of the poorest countries of the world, and beer companies give away their signs for free to let you know you can find it there. The prices in Cuba are crazy, off, wrong. Economics, price theory works, but it doesn't reflect the real scarcities around the globe because of their planned economy. They have a tremendous shortage, and this will resonate with listeners probably. Everybody knows the quintessential American automobiles in Cuba. The old 1950s automobiles. Do you have any idea? These things are held together with popsicle sticks and bubble gum. Wow. Any idea what one of them goes for? Keeping in mind that the average Cuban earns less than $3,000 a year.
I have no clue.
Over $15,000. And a modern car like a Peugeot by modern in quotations here, Peugeot from the 1990s, these might go for $30,000. They just have a huge scarcity of cars because the government doesn't allow importation of them or very limited importation of them. They'll like to blame it on the U.S. so-called blockade, they call it, but the embargo just prohibits the U.S. companies from sending cars there. It doesn't prevent Kias or anything else from going there. The Cuban government that does it. So the prices are all wrong. They have limited free enterprise there. So no system is absolute pure capitalism or pure socialism. The limited private enterprise, they allow individuals to rent out rooms in their houses, and they allow limited private restaurants. And there you can see the power of incentives. They're well kept, the people are timely, they try hard, in contrast to state hotels and state restaurants, which are god-awful. But at the same time, they're operating in a socialist economic system, so the private restaurants, what they do is okay, but it's rather bland, and all of them have basically the same dozen to 15 items on the menu everywhere, and it's because they deal with the state supply chain to get their ingredients. Cuban food in Cuba sucks. Cuban food in Miami is great.
Yeah.
And it's not the difference of the Cubans, it's the difference of the economic system.
Wow, that is so interesting. So, folks, we're talking with Benjamin Powell, again, author of the book Socialism Sucks. Two economists drink their way through the unfree world. So the subtitle there, Benjamin, what were you guys trying to convey? You guys are going through the unfree world, and you're having libations, and you came to a conclusion about what the quality of beverage you can get in socialist countries.
Yeah, so running through the book is kind of a metaphor. So the book is, free market economics, Milton Friedman style meets Anthony Bourdain style of travel and drinking.
I love it. I love it.
But the underlying metaphor of what's going on there is looking at the alcohol between countries reflects the differences in their economic system. So in Sweden, you can get wonderful beer, Belgian beer, and it's high quality, but they tax the bejesus out of it. So you pay a lot for it because of their high taxes and their welfare state. Venezuela, now that's the polar opposite. Polar is, by the way, the name of their national beer company, privately owned, but government controls over it. And they ran out of beer. Venezuela ran out of beer. More specifically, they didn't allocate enough foreign exchange in their centralized system in order to import barley to make the beer. As a result, they ran out of beer. Cuba, you can get beer. There's two types, Cristal and Bucanero. They're both about 4.5% to 5% alcohol, and they both taste like a kind of crappy Budweiser. The North Korean, it's god-awful swill. It's hard to even get one of those down. But then go to highly capitalist countries, and you have a great variety. And in fact, Bob and I, we went to Socialism 2018 conference, the biggest socialist gathering in the United States in Chicago. And they were serving a Revolution IPA on tap there, which is a privately owned beer company in Illinois that loves putting socialist imagery on their products. But ironically, that one privately owned company produces a greater variety and quality of beer than all of the socialist countries in the world combined.
Mm-hmm. Because it's because it's privately owned and you have incentive and you want to make a product people want to buy, so you make money. That's pretty much that's pretty straightforward. Yeah, and that's why the title caught my eye, because Joe was saying, my producer Joe, he was like, "Oh, what's this about? Is this about the poor, socialists, the victims of socialism, that they've got to have better alcohol because they need it so much because their country's just a terrible place to be, so there's nothing else to do but drink." And I said, "No, Joe, I think it's the opposite. I think they're so bad that there's no variety, and because there's no incentive to make a good alcoholic beverage."
Yeah, and I'll give you an example for just within one country. So the Soviet Republic of Georgia that we went to, which is a dramatic success story now, highly capitalist, one of the 10 freest economies in the world today, did major reforms following the Rose Revolution a little over a dozen years ago. But Georgia, was in the Southern Soviet Union, just north kind of Iran and Armenia, Azerbaijan, off the Black Sea. And the Soviets were commies, not idiots. They knew to make wine in Georgia rather than, say, Siberia. But what they did was they planted mass production wine on fertile, low-lying, easy-to-farm land and produced a bunch of swill. All of that has been ripped up since Georgia has become capitalist. And what Georgia does now is it produces traditional Georgian wine that's fantastic, that's much higher quality production and what the market actually likes. And they do that in the hillier country in traditional winemaking areas.
Wow. Hey, I do have one question, kind of unrelated to the book, but you mentioned North Korea. Are you encouraged with the status, the diplomatic relations between the United States and North Korea at this point?
I don't know if I'm particularly optimistic on real recent developments, but I'll say this, that isolating and ignoring has not been a way to undermine socialism. I think the dumbest policy the United States has towards Cuba is the embargo and trade restrictions. When free market countries trade with less free countries, ideas cross-pollinate, and ultimately the ideas of freedom are more powerful than the ideas of central planning and control. I think we'd do more to undermine the Cuban system, Cuban socialist system, by having more Americans go there and by having free trade with them. I think the same is true for North Korea, although I think the opportunities for trade are probably more limited, and it doesn't seem like recent diplomacy is really pushing us very far in that direction. But I think isolationism against them is not going to be a winning strategy.
Well, Benjamin Powell, I appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate this book and the conclusions that you draw. I would have never thought to draw the conclusions I guess what I'm trying to say is, the whole alcohol thing is fascinating to me. I would have never guessed that, but that is such an interesting hook. And I think, hopefully it'll get some of these young people to realize, speak their language, if you will, and to realize, hey, socialism's not a good thing, right?
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul.
All right,
Cheers.
appreciate it. Benjamin Powell, everybody. Author of Socialism Sucks. Two economists drink their way through the unfree world.